Festivals. Herzlich willkommen hier im Literaturhaus. Mein Name ist Nicola Steiner, ich bin die Leiterin des Hauses und ich begrüße Sie alle sehr herzlich zu den Tagen internationaler Literatur hier im Literaturhaus. Und ich möchte den Eröffnungsabend nutzen, um meiner Stellvertreterin Elisabeth Bronfen für die sorgfältige und behutsame Kuratierung des Festivals zu danken. Die Blumen kommen am Sonntag. Einen großen Applaus, aber bitte jetzt schon. In dieser Zeit, in der die Welt vielerorts aus den Fugen geraten zu sein scheint und Ordnungen brüchig werden, in der man sich auf nichts mehr verlassen kann, in der auch Zölle wieder aufgehoben werden zum großen Glück, hat Isabel einmal mehr versucht, uns allen einen Raum des Zuhörens und Nachdenkens zu eröffnen unter dem Titel Chaos and Order. Sie sehen es prominent. Begegnen sich in diesen Tagen Autorinnen und Autoren aus den USA und der Schweiz, zwei Kulturen, die in sehr unterschiedlichen gesellschaftlichen Kontexten verortet sind und die aber doch ähnliche Fragen umtreiben. Wie lässt sich über Unsicherheit, Widerspruch, Aufbruch, Zerrissenheit schreiben und welche Sprache findet man für die Sehnsucht nach Orientierung, ohne vielleicht auch gleich als konservativ zu gelten? Literatur hat keine Lösungen parat, das wissen Sie alle, aber sie ermöglicht den Dialog und dafür stehen wir. Und deshalb hoffen wir, dass diese Tage dazu beitragen, den Dialog zwischen Chaos und Order nicht als Gegensatz, sondern als kreative Energie zu begreifen, als etwas, das uns bewegt und verbindet. Und ich habe vorhin festgestellt, die Klimaanlage ist kaputt. Apropos bewegt und verbindet, mich bewegt die Hitze. Ich ziehe auch gleich meinen Schal aus. Falls Ihnen zwischendurch zu heiß sein sollte, scheuen Sie sich bitte nicht, einfach zwischendurch mal das Fenster auf und zu machen, nicht, dass mir jemand hier ohnmächtig wird. Haben wir zur Vorsicht einen Arzt oder eine Ärztin im Raum? Ah, ja, genau. Oh, ich bin so dankbar. Vielen Dank in der ersten Reihe. Ich liebe Ärzte. Oh. Also, in diesem Sinne wünsche ich Ihnen inspirierende Begegnungen, überraschende Einsichten und viele Gespräche über das, was zwischen Chaos und Ordnung entsteht. Und nun übergebe ich das Wort an eine meiner Ex-Kolleginnen, Jennifer Kakshuri, Literaturredaktorin bei SRF und Moderatorin des Literaturclubs, die mit Elisabeth Bronfen und Kristof Keller und Maaza Mengiste über die Verbindung zwischen Zürich und dem Sehnsuchtsort New York sprechen wird. Einen großen Applaus für Jennifer und unsere Gäste.
Thank you very much, Nicola. We will switch to English now, and I'm very excited to be here because we were speaking about the tariffs and that the Supreme Court just dropped them. That's why we're having wine, because it's a reason to celebrate tonight.
They did not drop them.
They didn't drop them.
They have found it. It was illegal on the part of Trump and the Trump administration to invoke a certain rule of exception. So it's worse than dropping.
It's worse than
Yes,
dropping.
it's
Worse than
illegal.
dropping. So we're excited. Also, Kristof, Maaza,
we are celebrating.
We're celebrating. But also, it's a very tricky moment right now to speak about the United States, about North America. I said before, but I guess I'm just a very. I'm not very, how do you say, festive, in a very festive mood, because I'm very worried also about the world, about chaos in the United States and Iran, in Israel, like the whole political situation I find very scary right now. But still, we're here to talk about New York, about how we love or dislike New York, what New York does to us, did to us, and how we dream about New York. For the record, for once, I also am part of the content of a panel that I'm moderating. My mother is from New York, from Queens, New York. She lives in New York, in Manhattan now, like many years. She moved back. She didn't like Zurich very much. We might speak about Zurich in the 70s and 80s. And so I had grandparents in Queens. I have many, many cousins in New York and in all of the United States. And so I have very fond and very mixed memories because New York does this to you. You love it, you hate it, you're ambivalent. There's so many different New Yorks. My guests tonight are Elisabeth Bronfen, Maaza Mengiste, and Kristof Keller, and I will introduce them while we talk, while we're in conversation, because I don't want to talk for much longer alone. I want to be in conversation. Elisabeth, you're Professor Emerita of English and American Studies at the University of Zurich. You're also a Global Distinguished Professor at NYU. That means that you're in New York quite a lot, every year for a few weeks, months. You're also a writer. Several books have been published, including a novel and 2 cookbooks. Your latest cookbook last December. So you're very New Yorkish in the sense of there's so many parts that make you Elisabeth. You were born in Munich. Your father was from Brooklyn. You wanted to study in New York, but you ended up in Massachusetts at Harvard. Doesn't sound too bad to me as a mother of kids. But what pulled you toward New York as a young person?
So the tricky thing is I was in New York only very briefly when I was a young person to visit my Jewish American grandparents, who I saw only once in my life. I have very little memory of that New York. I wanted to go to Barnard, or at that time Columbia was not yet open to women. And this was a time, and I would like to emphasize this was a time when, and this happened, you went to the library with the keys, a bit of change in your pocket, and you were held up on the street and shot to death. And so my father said, there is no way, I'm not even giving you the $20 it takes for you to try to get into Barnard. You can't have that. So then I had to go to Harvard, you know. I mean, and I always say, I could have also gone to Princeton, but people said, no, Elisabeth, you can't, that's too American. I always say that if I had gotten into Barnard, and that would have been in the late 70s until 1980, I would probably not have returned to Germany, because New York at that time was dangerous, gritty, difficult, but incredibly exciting, precisely because there had been a white flight out of New York. People moved into the suburbs. Thus, there were many areas of New York that were war zones, that were very, very dangerous to be in, but they were also very cheap. And this is where a whole set of artistic movements came, whether it's the punk rock, whether it's a certain form of art that was done below Houston, which is now, Soho is now one huge shopping mall. But at that time it was not. And there were many little shops, and there were many little restaurants and cafes, and there were very many different people who didn't have to be wealthy, and they didn't have to be working for something that didn't exist at the time, which we now call Google. They were just there for various reasons. So I would say what then drew me to New York was perhaps vaguely, but I don't remember that, the fact that that's where my father is from. And I didn't know that side of him as well, because we grew up in Munich. But also because at the time, New York, though it was so dangerous, it was also a place where incredibly interesting film was being made. This is the time of Taxi Driver, Scorsese, New American Cinema. A lot of interesting literature was written at the time. For example, all of the young New American, now old or dead, like Oster, and a lot of art was going on there, and it was wild in a way that. And I'm from Munich, and now I live here, and everything is very contained here. So
why do you look at me?
She was looking at the window. Zurich.
Everything is very contained here. So in a sense, the contrast is what drew me.
So you came to Zurich in 1993. How was Zurich then compared to now, 30 years later?
Okay.
Short answer.
Hard to be short. Let me be quick. At the time, my memory is of many restaurants with a lot of wood and very standard, elegant, good Swiss food. There was none of this chrome glass that we now have. None of this Lagerstraße, Europaallee. I mean, I remember Lagerstraße that was black. So it was more bourgeois. It was more homogeneous. It was more sophisticated in a way. There was a lot of money. People were very, very generous, and they loved the idea of people coming from outside, energizing and vitalizing and regenerating things here. That's what I would say what, to me, Zurich was like in the early 90s, both incredibly boring and incredibly creative. Because I keep thinking about writing in New York. I can't imagine writing in New York. I always say there's so much static in the air. You want to be out on the street. You want to be talking to people. And I say, there's no one thinking much here in Zurich. So the air is very clean and you can really, really focus.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Maaza Mengiste, you're a novelist and essayist. You were born in Addis Ababa. I don't know where to look at you. I'll try and look at you here. I see you here on my screen, and the audience sees you here on this screen. You grew up in Kenya and Nigeria, very early years there, then moved to the US, first to Los Angeles, then to New York. You now live in New York, in the Bronx, which used to be very different too. When I was a kid, at least, we never went to the Bronx because that was scary, as my grandmother would say. And right now you're in Berlin. You have a residency in Berlin near the Wannsee, a very Swiss place for me, with a lake and it being very residential and quiet. Can you tell us what New York was for you before you ever set foot into the city, onto the city?
Yes, and it's wonderful to almost be in Zurich again. It's very nice. Well, before I moved to New York, my mother and I, when we would travel to the US, it's interesting, I think I had mentioned this to you before, we would travel through Zurich on our way to New York and spend some time in Zurich, go to Mount Pilatus. I wrote an article a few years ago in the New York Times that was also translated, I believe, in German, in Switzerland, about these experiences of how interesting these two cities were for me just traveling. When I was traveling to New York, maybe in the 80s, the late 80s at that time, it felt, it was crazy, it was crowded, it was dirty, it was noisy, but also very exciting. And my mother is a shopper. She loves to shop. And you could find bargains on the streets. It was not the glamorous Soho that it is now. And so for me, I thought of New York almost as a musical city. A lot of sounds and rhythms, the taxis, the buses, the cars, the voices. It felt, it was alive. And I never imagined living there until I moved to Los Angeles and realized I hated Los Angeles. And really what I was missing was what I felt of that energy of New York. I thought LA would have it because it's a big city, but it didn't. It was very different. And I remember the minute I arrived in New York, walking through my neighborhood in Brooklyn, I said, this is it. This is what I've thought a city should be and could be. And so I've been there ever since.
And what is Zurich to you in contrast to New York? You were here, you're a writer in residence during lockdown. That's why we never met in person, because you were here at Literaturhaus, you were in Zurich for actually quite a while, but there were no events that took place without computers, like we were all at home looking at each other, listening to each other.
Yeah. I had arrived in Zurich maybe just a few short weeks before lockdown happened. I had arrived when it was January of 2020. We went into lockdown by March. And so I had a chance to walk around, and what I'll never forget, seeing trucks cleaning the streets. And I laughed at that. And I think I took pictures and videos of the cars, of the streets being cleaned, and I sent it to my friends in New York saying, look what the Swiss do. But I was just, I fell in love with the openness, the air, the beauty of the city. The pace was slower, but I work better in slower places and quieter places, and so I instantly liked Zurich. And even during lockdown, I managed to do very safe walks with friends, also with Gesa Schneider, who was the director at the time at the Literaturhaus. We would take walks and just talk. And so my memory of Zurich from my residency is one of a quietness. Of course, there was fear and people were afraid, but also this sense that Swiss people really trusted their leadership, which was a very, very big difference from what was happening in the United States. And I really noticed that as well.
What are you working on right now in Berlin at the Wannsee?
You know, I'm working on a novel that I basically started researching in Zurich during lockdown. And it's a novel that is set in Berlin in the 20s and 30s. And I won't say very much more because it's still a work in progress, but I'm hoping to finish it relatively soon. But again, I'm in Wannsee. It's beautiful here. It's slower paced. And so I'm finding it very, very good for writing.
And trucks cleaning the streets there too?
No.
No? It's only Zurich. Okay. So Zurich moment, I'll never forget. I'll think of you when I see trucks next time. Kristof Keller, you're writer and editor, and you're well known for the novel Der beste Tänzer and for the memoir Every Cripple a Superhero. As you can tell, I have trouble saying the word cripple because New York has taught me not to use words like that, to say other words, and also not to say disabled, but to say special abilities instead of disabled or cripple. Before we speak about that book and the novel that you just published now, you were born in St. Gallen and you lived in New York for 20 years. What was the image that you had of New York as a kid who wanted to travel there one day?
Well, as a kid, courtesy of the media, the novels, and mainly the movies, I kind of felt like I grew up a little bit in New York. And my very earliest book I wrote when I was like 8 or 9, and it became a book because it was Kasperle stories, and it became a book because my father bound them all together. So it's a book that exists in a print run of one copy, and it was immediately sold out.
Okay.
And in there, I have my character travel to New York, and I also was the illustrator of that book, of that story, and it was skyscrapers, and nothing but skyscrapers, and I wanted to see those. And then the first chance I got to actually go to New York was when I was something like 17. And it was first really a hate-love relationship because, first I'm in a wheelchair, obviously, but I have a progressive disease. And then when I was 17, I could still walk for quite a bit. And I had my first cliché American experience then, because I had met somebody who said, "Oh, whenever you're in New York, call me," you know. And 17, from St. Gallen, naive, and I was there, called that person up, and no, today's not good, bye. And so I was on that first day completely alone in this huge city and just walked around and around and around and hated it so much. All those skyscrapers I really wanted to see. I mean, they just bent over and crushed me. Until, and that's probably also a cliche, not by chance, I stumbled into the Empire State Building.
And you went inside?
And upstairs.
And
all
upstairs.
the way. I took the elevator.
I took the elevator too.
And up there I fell in love with the city. That was so absolutely fascinating. It was also a sunset. It was like 7 was like 7 p.m. It was gorgeous.
And you can be outside at the time, no? Of
Yes,
the Empire
yeah,
State
it
Building.
was outside. That was outside. So, and then, I mean, the night I spent, I think it was somewhere in Tribeca or so, I found a YMCA, which was just awful, and spent one of my worst nights there, you know, scared to shit, you know, the noises, and I do think I think what scared me the most was the street cleaning trucks at 5 a.m.
Okay, so when you gazed from St. Gallen towards Zurich, what was it that you saw in Zurich? Because Zurich and St. Gallen have a strange relationship.
Yes, well, first I want to say, I mean, I am married to an American, no, to a New Yorker. Jan was right there. And when we used to spend our summers in St. Gallen, and each time she asked me, well, I may have to point it out, St. Gallen is a little bit smaller than New York. And each time she asked me, well, where is the rest of St. Gallen? And it took me quite a while to come up with a good answer, but at some point I said, well, it's in Zurich.
That's a good answer. Yeah, so...
What was the question?
No, that was the question.
Okay.
How did you gaze towards Zurich? So Zurich was a part of St. Gallen, like from Bern also. There's a band called Zürich West, which is a very Bernese band here in Switzerland. So I want to speak about, quickly, the book, Every Cripple a Superhero, and it's a memoir that you wrote. I want to know how you started writing that, or what gave you the impulse to write it?
Well, the main impulse was, I mean, I wrote the book that you mentioned, The Best Dancer, which I don't call it a novel. I used to call it a memoir, but once I was done, I realized that, well, it's more like a novel, so I settled on the term Erinnerungsmemoir, Erinnerungsroman. And Every Cripple, I decided to write something like 10 years after The Best Dancer, because what I do have is a progressive disease. Life is a progressive disease. So I thought it was time to write a second one. And this one then, I started to write it in, I think it was in 2015, so it's quite a while ago already. And I then also decided to write it in English, because at that point we kind of meant we would spend, well, the rest of our lives in New York. I mean,
But you came back 2018.
Yes, yeah, last days of 18. Yeah.
So Every Cripple a Superhero is about the streets of New York. With pictures.
The pictures
The
are.
pictures.
The pictures are. I mean, the book. I mean, here it is. Well, from up there, probably looks just like any book. Well, okay.
But
it's a hybrid memoir. I really think. I mean, what I did then is I spent like half a year just writing diary entries, and then over the next year or so I went over those and put them into good shape. The order was already there because it was chronological, and the streets you're referring to are. I also worked as a photographer for a little while, especially in New York. I need New York to do pictures. St. Gallen is not big enough for that. And those pictures are all of broken curb cuts, you know, which it didn't start as an art project. I actually had actually quite hilariously naive idea of taking pictures and send them to some department with the idea that they're going to fix them.
Which would be great. Will never happen.
But it never happened.
Just one second,
because
Maaza, there's a carnival outside, so the noise you hear is the carnival in front of the Literaturhaus. Sorry, it's not trucks.
it's not street cleaning.
It's not street cleaning.
No,
It sounds like
no.
it though. A little bit more rhythmical.
So, but what I then did, I was very interested in taking pictures of reflections, you know, from a shopping window to just a curved glass or water rippled by the wind or whatever. And so when I was doing those pictures, those broken curb cuts were filled with water. There was sun, there was a little bit of wind, and the pictures I took turned out to be magical, because you would see kind of a distorted reflection of a building that was brown, but it almost shimmered in gold. It was really beautiful. It was way too beautiful to send them to some street department in New York, which is why the curbs in New York are still not fixed.
It's your fault.
It's my fault,
Okay,
yes.
so now we know.
But they're nice pictures.
And your latest novel, River, An American Dreaming, just came out now. It came out in India. Your publisher is from India. Can you tell us why India, not the US or Great Britain or Switzerland?
Well, it was kind of a little bit of a very nice magical story that I already had a bunch of books with that small Indian press, and for a reason completely unbeknownst to me, I wasn't in the mood to publish it in the US. So, I mean, I guess I would, but I wasn't in the mood, or didn't have the energy to find a press there. So that's why I decided to go kind of the easy way, because I knew these guys will do the book. They will make a beautiful edition. I also liked the story, you know, that, you know, a small town boy from St. Gallen goes to New York and writes a novel about New York, comes back to Switzerland, finishes it, and then it comes out. Then it comes out in Santiniketan, West Bengal, in the town of Tagore. So I just love that story. So
That's a story itself already.
That's a story itself, and now it exists, and it's well, like in a way, like every book, it's a message in a bottle, and maybe once you know who and his cronies are gone, you know, we can go back to New York and publish it there. Who knows?
We all hope to go back to New York.
Yes.
We want to hear a little passage from your novel, and then I want to also have Maaza and Elisabeth join the conversation. You can always interrupt me, Maaza, even if you're not here physically, and Elisabeth also, but please, Kristof.
Okay, the book is called River, An American Dreaming, and it is, I think it's a very New York novel. I started this thing in 2011 and finished it last year. So it's a long journey, and it's many books. I mean, it's everything from a pretty cruel serial killer novel to a love story and satire on the New York art scene, and mythological New York novel. And I think what I also like a lot is that if you ask me what New York book it is actually based on, I have to say it's Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita.
We'll speak about New York books and New York films afterwards also, because there's so many, and it's interesting.
Happy to talk about Russia.
Okay.
So this is a very early chapter, so I don't have to say much more about the book itself. Professor Kurt H. Adler, Rhinelander University's fabled archaeologist on wheels, sped through Washington Square Park in his motorized wheelchair. His red-rimmed glasses of supernatural size caught the golden evening light, while his unruly mop of brown hair pointed toward the humid mid-August sunset. Running ahead of him was Harry, his 10-year-old son, clad in a full entomologist's outfit, khaki shorts, khaki shirt, khaki hat, and wearing the serious expression befitting his profound profession. Trotting beside him was Poe, their spirited 2-year-old toy terrier and an undeniably fierce squirrel hunter. Kurt caught up with them at the chain-link fence enclosing the park's controversial excavation site beneath its most legendary tree, the Hangman's Elm. This 300-year-old English elm, one of the oldest in New York City, was renowned for its gruesome, albeit fictional, past. Supposedly, some 20 people had dangled from its branches, a myth conjured by General Lafayette's overactive imagination, but debunked by Kurt himself in a scathing academic paper that cemented his reputation as Rhinelander's resident mythbuster. A new myth now shadowed the park, Kurt's Dig, an excavation that wasn't supposed to exist. Not if Rhinelander University had its way. The institution treated Washington Square Park as its de facto campus, plastering its skyline across brochures and business cards. Not if Parks Department architect Ambrose C. Hutzwell, who ranked archaeologists just above sewer rats, had gotten his wish. But the NYC Landmarks Preservation Commission had other ideas, halting the radical reconstruction of the park before it began. To Kurt, the $20 million redesign was unnecessary at best. Sure, the potholes, the benches, fences needed sprucing up, but realigning the fountain by a few feet just to match the arch and Fifth Avenue? Ludicrous. The charm of the park was its unpolished bohemian disarray. But the city wanted more tourists, because what else did Manhattan need if not more crowds? Kurt produced the key, but Harry snatched it first. Unlocking the gate and bounding into the pit, Poe scampered behind. Kurt followed, rolling down the ramp he had personally designed and patented, the AER, or Archaeological Earth Ramp. At 36 inches wide, with a 1 to 12 slope, it had become the accessibility standard for archaeological digs, smooth, sturdy, and as effortless as it was groundbreaking. Easy, fellows, Kurt called, wobbling slightly as his wheelchair picked up speed. Poe sniffed around with the frantic focus of a four-legged fire extinguisher, while Harry darted about like a wind-up toy, his energy inexhaustible. It was the blue hour, Kurt's favorite time of day. The sun clung stubbornly to its final moments, casting a reluctant glow. On humid August evenings like this, Kurt imagined mist rising, not from the city, but from the bones buried beneath it, victims of long-ago yellow fever epidemics interred under the park. A sticky breeze carried the city's evening symphony. The Girl from Ipanema, the distant thunder of Rachmaninoff's Prelude No. 5, a drum solo, Hare Krishna chants. Harry and Poe zigzagged between two buckets of sifted soil and the excavation's most absurd feature, a vacuum cleaner, its elephantine trunk coiled and waiting. The site was a scatter of tools and treasures. A flashlight lay forgotten, its beam casting a dim, indifferent glow. A hand shovel rested with its metal tongue buried in dirt. Stacked crates held relics from the last student dig, a brass keg spigot, a green Dutch gin bottle, a cannonball, a squirrel skull, and the porcelain head of an 1860s doll. A sudden burst of Poe's barking and the eager beeping of a smartphone jolted Kurt from his musings. His thoughts drifted. Beneath the excavation site flowed Minetta Creek, once a rich fishing ground for the Lenape who had lived here for tens of thousands of years. Sam, Two Feathers Hummingbird Jr., Kurt's assistant, had told him the Lenape legend of Minetta. According to the tale, the creek had once been a giant evil snake, driving people mad until the Lenape hero Nanapush forced it into the form of a meandering stream. That had been at the dawn of mankind. Now, Minetta was an underground trickle, surfacing only in heavy rains, sometimes flooding basements, including Kurt's own. When Sam learned about the dig over Minetta Creek, his reaction had been anything but enthusiastic. In no uncertain terms, he demanded that Kurt stop digging. Or else. Or else what? Kurt had asked, amused. Or else madness will rise again. Kurt had laughed it off. A little bit more madness? Who would even notice?
Thank you, Kristof. River and American Dreaming. The book is also on the book table outside, and you can get it there if you want and continue reading.
Either here at the book table or in Shantiniketan, West Bengal.
So you nodded, Elisabeth, and Maaza, you smiled when you heard Washington Square Park and the Blue Hour. What crosses your mind when you hear this or when you think of Washington Square Park? Elisabeth. Maaza? Sorry, what did you say? You want Maaza? Maaza, maybe you say something. Sorry, you say something?
I would love to hear Elisabeth's thoughts on this too. I mean, but you can hear me.
Yes.
Washington Square was really my first introduction to New York when I moved there. I went to grad school at NYU, so it felt to me before I knew other parts of New York, like the heart of the city, both with its history and people who had lived there for decades, who had not yet been priced out of that area, people who still remembered, the beat poets and the era of all of that art and all the protests and all of that. I had a favorite bar that no longer exists there. New York has changed even since I was a grad student there. But I had a favorite bar that was in Greenwich Village. I would go sit at my usual seat, and people who were living in rent-controlled apartments and they had been there, for 20 or 30 years would come to the same bar, and just having these conversations with them of what New York was like, what New York is like now, what they were doing in the 60s, those who knew some of the beat poets. Those are my memories of Washington Square, the richness of it, but just the history of it. It's, as a writer who is really invested in history, it felt to me the way I feel in Berlin now. is that I was often in New York walking through layers of history, not as old, of course, as different parts of Europe, but still very present. And Washington Square is just still alive, even though they renovated it.
And also New York is such a place of so many stories, of so many people having left some place behind and shifted to New York and maybe moved on to the rest of the United States. And for me, Washington Square is also like a place where many people somehow meet and how things get together, and it changes every 10, 15 years. It's a different place. Elizabeth, you teach near there.
I think that it's a place where you can really track the changes of the city, and I think it's important to, first of all, remember that New York City is one of the main entrance points for immigrants. And so New York changes with each new wave of immigrants, and the different communities change. It's also important, I think, to remember that the beginning of New York is at the very lower part of Manhattan, and then only really in the course of the 19th century does the city slowly move upwards, so that I have a friend who lives in a very fancy building called the Dakota, I don't know whether you know this, the Dakota. This is a very, very expensive, beautiful, fantastic thing on West...
Rosemary's Baby.
Yes, well, okay, if you know Rosemary's Baby online. So this is West Side. It's the West Side. It's around, I think around 67th or 70th. Anyway, it's called the Dakota because when it was built around 1900, to live up there, you could just as well have been in the Dakotas. So even at the turn of the century, for people who have been watching this show, Gilded Age, there wasn't much above, let's say, 40th Street. So this whole development is also something one has to bring into mind or bring into the conversation when we talk about New York. And I say this because initially, for me, my first association with Washington Square would, of course, be Henry James and Edith Wharton. That is to say, a certain moment in the late 19th century where a type of person, an artist, a bohemian, not the upper class that people like Wharton and James were normally describing, would have lived. And then it becomes more middle class. NYU was once a university where people from New York went if they couldn't get into the Ivy League. And then I remember Washington Square when I went there in the early mid-70s into the early 80s. It was very, very dangerous. There were a lot of drug addicts. People were killed all the time.
That was like Zurich in the 80s also.
Yes, but okay,
different.
Fair enough. Lots of people killed in Zurich, right?
But the drug scene here, the Riviera.
And I will never, because I'm thinking about this, that I remember waiting under the arch for my brother to come, and someone crept up behind me and placed his tongue in my, it's really gross, and I can still feel the tongue in the ear. Just to say, that was also New York. Of course, it was a place in Washington Square, but it was also a place where people who used to be middle class, yes, they were still living there, but they were holding out when it really, as I'd said before, it was partially a war zone, especially if you moved more towards the east, which was then called ABC.
Alphabet City.
Yes, Alphabet City. D was then dead.
Scary.
I think C was courageous and D was, I don't know, defiant. Anyway, now, of course, when and this was probably my third smile. My first was thinking of these elegant people in a Henry James novel walking around the park. The second, this memory. And then the third, of course, if you're walking around Washington Square Park now, it's changed slightly post-COVID, but under Bloomberg, New York City became so wealthy, it became so suburban, and people who wouldn't normally go to New York City, suburbanites, decided they wanted to move into Manhattan. So at this point, NYU also, which used to be, as I say, a school for the not that smart students from New York, has now become one of the most expensive undergraduate schools for a predominantly Asian group of students. It's very, very popular. It's probably one of the most popular colleges in the States because you can do so many things around Washington Square right now. You can have yoga, you can have massages, you can drink bubble tea, etc. And now the park is a different kind of place. Yes, a lot of people still meet there, but of course you see, and I thought this was what you were invoking, and it's really called NYU Town. You have all these purple banners that mark NYU from the Greenwich Village all the way to, let's say, Avenue A. And it's you're walking around and you're, as an older person, you're trying to navigate all these incredibly young, thin-legged, beautiful, barely dressed, I mean, it's in September, barely dressed young people for whom it's their playground. And NYU had actually tried to buy Washington Square, and thank God the city resisted. Yes, you're raising your eyebrows. Thank God the city resisted, because they wanted to turn this into their campus. And the city said, no, you can't. So that's why it's still open. Otherwise, it would only be open to students.
And Kristof lived there at Washington Square.
Yeah, for almost 20 years. Where? And at 2 Fifth Avenue.
Yes, I know.
There was just, it's the first building at the beginning, you know, right opposite of 1 Fifth Avenue.
So what?
We lived there for almost 20 years, and we really lived through the changes of Washington Square Park, which is also a little bit of a sad story, because when we arrived there in, what was it, like 2002, in those years, the park was, yes, it needed fixing, you know, and yes, there was a lot of drug dealing and junkies, and at night I wouldn't really go there, but during the day it was really the students' park, not the students' campus. And they had these rotten old benches, and we sat there and read and talked, and then all of a sudden the city decided to turn the park into, well, apparently a Bloombergian corporate plaza, and they put the $20 million into it, and they turned it into a boring, lifeless creature. I mean, there's still some beauty, but it's really not the same. I mean, just think about aligning. I mean, moving that frigging fountain by a few feet so it aligns with the arch. I mean, what bohemian would do that? You know. So, and that really means they didn't understand the spirit of the square or wanted to break it. And and once the renovation was done, it was in all the tourist guides, and
that was it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, New York is a busy city, but even in Lower Fifth Avenue, I mean, you could idle, but then it was streams of tourists going to that friggin' park, you know, where there was.
So it's a bit ambivalent. On the one hand, there's more safety. But then on the other hand, it draws a lot of people to these places.
But the funny thing was also that they sort of forgot to budget the maintenance of the park. So after the 20 million was done,
that was it.
Everybody left, and the volunteers got to take over. And guess who also took over again? The drug dealers. So they were back.
Maaza, you're smiling. Do you get homesick?
Not for the rats.
No, okay, so anyone who's been in New York knows what you're talking about, but rats,
I mean,
the size of cats.
Yeah,
scary.
they really, you know, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. Yeah. There is a political office for someone to kill rats in New York. But I think when I think about, I completely understand, you know, what has happened to Washington Square, but listening now, I'm also thinking about the ways that the park and what happened to the park is also symbolic of what has happened to New York in general. Like in the process of cleaning it up, in a sense, New York has become very much like every other city now, where I can go down certain streets. I mean, forget Fifth Avenue, but other places around Soho, and I could be anywhere else because the shops are the same, the cafes are the same, the restaurants are part of a chain. the cities like New York are starting to look identical, and we're
Like
losing.
London. London looks like, I
Oh,
was in Brick Lane
absolutely.
just a few weeks ago. It looks like Soho. I was very excited first, and then I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Why?
and so I'm torn between this idea of wanting to clean up a city, because I mean human beings have a right to live in a place that is clean and healthy, but at the same time, how do we maintain the vibrancy of a place, and what is that balance? And I live in the Bronx in New York, and this is a place that everyone calls dangerous and dirty and full of crime, and no one wants to go there. And for a long time, my neighbors and I have said, this is our secret. This is the best kept secret in New York. Where I live is beautiful, with parks and lakes and fishing. And, and about 2 or 3 years ago, New York Times, now the place will be ruined in a few years, but New York Times put up in their real estate section, New York's best kept secret. And of my neighborhood, I'm pulled and I'm torn between this idea of New York was really dangerous, the Bronx is really dangerous, but also this sense of how do we keep the balance? How do we maintain a balance in a city with safety but life? Vibrancy
And not a museum.
creativity. Yeah. And believe me, I wish that New York would get cleaner. There are smells I've never smelled anywhere else, when it's in the summer. We have a rat czar that was appointed by the last mayor, and that person actually did incredible work with that. I'm not scared walking down the street on days when everyone leaves out their trash for collection, because the rats now don't jump out at you. But maybe this is the thing of New York. That's the love-hate, maybe, that people talk about, that push and pull. I don't know how to balance all these things I love and all these things that I really do dislike about it.
I do want to say one thing about the Bronx, because we tend to have a stereotypical idea of many things, including the Bronx. There are huge areas of the Bronx, and that's exactly what you just pointed to, that are very upper class, that are very stylish. There's a huge Jewish area where people moved, I think in the 50s, as they were moving up from the lower East Side.
Yeah.
But people don't know about that, because when you say Bronx, people think ghetto. The same as they say with Harlem, they think ghetto. And of course, Harlem was always also more complicated. But I just want to pick up on the point that you make about this balance, and maybe now eine Lanze brechen for my lovely square that I walk around every day. First of all, we do all, because you moved afterwards. I mean, the New York that I was talking about that's dangerous is the 70s and 80s. If you're there in the early 2000s, you're already in Giuliani time, right? One of the great New York films is Scorsese's Taxi Driver, where Travis Bickle drives around 42nd Street and talks about how, they want someone to come and wash all the dirt and the scum and whatever away. And the person who did that was Giuliani. After he got rid of the mafia, he decided to really turn around the city. And I feel very ambivalent, because I've lived in New York since the mid-70s, and I spent so much time in utter terror getting out of the subway or getting into, and not just because of the rats, just to, walking somewhere and wondering if I turn around the corner, is it going to be all dark and someone will kill me? But on the other hand, of course, yes, that was a time when, precisely because it was cheap to live there, so many things were possible there. The whole bohemia was people who were leaving, someone like Nan Goldin, for example, who were leaving their happy, clean little suburban homes because they wanted a place that didn't have all of this regulation. So I understand the the force behind all of that. But if you've lived through all that terror, once Giuliani started cleaning up the city, I was very ambivalent, because for the first time we were able to walk around the west side, which is also now very fancy.
Very fancy.
And you know, you're seeing buildings, you've never seen these buildings before. And they've started to clean up the buildings and to paint them, and you see the beautiful artwork on the buildings, the sculpture on the buildings. So it's not just that New York became larger and larger for me because I was able to walk into areas that I really would not have been able to walk into in the 70s. But also because, and I remember that, and that would have been in the early 2000s actually, you know, that in Washington Square Park, parents were in Washington Square Park with their children at midnight. No one would have thought of doing that in the 70s. So I think that really is the ambivalence, the livability. And I think what we have to also bring into play, who can now afford to be in New York? Because I think part of the problem that has happened is that real estate has gone up so insanely that most of my NYU students, they live in the Bronx. No, they don't. They live in Queens and they live in Brooklyn. Like no one can, if you're not on NYU housing, which is what I get, they can't afford it down there. So that really also changes the city, who can live there. Yeah, and who can afford that, who can afford the food that you're eating there. And that, so I think I too am ambivalent, because I feel, you know, it used to be cheap, it used to be exciting, but it was dangerous. Now it's very expensive, a little less exciting, but very much not dangerous. And at the same time, if I may now say that, I live in an apartment and I live in the 18th floor, and I have a yard that I look into, and from that, because they actually managed to prevent NYU from building another building in the middle of two buildings. So there's huge empty square. Airspace and garden and park, etc. And I have a balcony, it's very filthy, but it doesn't matter. I can pull my chair out and then I can watch the sunset over the west side. And as you said before, I will insist on that now. I think sunsets in New York, whether it's on Fifth Avenue or whether it's on the 18th floor and you're looking out at the Hudson, are just absolutely magical. There's something in the air. The light changes, the smell, the quality of the air changes, the din changes, and that, you know, even if it's become completely commercialized, this magical quality just absolutely remains. And the most magical of all, and then I will stop, because everyone's dissing New York. I thought you guys were going to not, and then I would have to. But to be in Brooklyn on the Esplanade and look at the Manhattan skyline and watch the lights slowly go up, it's just amazing. It makes you think of every Broadway musical, but it's just spectacular. And then you have the skyline and all the many different lights, and all the many little people in those little lights, and you're watching it. It's really, partially because you were talking about the rhythm and the colors, and you were also, in a sense, doing this with your text. There's something about New York that is also very theatrical, very dramatic, very spectacular, in a way that I'm not surprised you left Los Angeles, one of the most boring places, which you can just drive around in a car, but I mean, it has absolutely none of the sensuality and the spectacle that New York has.
Well.
And they can't take that away from New York, even with all the money. Okay, so there you are. I've done my little aria here.
Well, New York is a portal to many, many other worlds.
Yes, and there are so many worlds in New York, because you have in every region.
The wrong one comes through, you know.
You have all these diasporas also, which makes it such a lively place full of stories and full of life, and it makes it vibrant, and it keeps it vibrant. But there is this sense of it becoming more and more like a museum. Like if I go through the streets, it's like I remember how, as a child or as a teenager, I went to Washington Square Park with my cousin, and he said, "You have to swear to me not to tell Grandma that I took you here," because there was like a concert there and whatever. But I mean, we are in the Literaturhaus. I want to speak about literature. I tried to look up like the most famous writers from New York, and I found a Wikipedia page with 1,800 writers on it, and I was like, oh God, I'll never make a list. So I have my own list of the New York, the images that I got through literature, who, of course, there was Harriet the Spy I read as a 11-year-old, and she takes us to the West Side. She's a spoiled brat, New Yorker spoiled brat with what we call Gouvernante in German, babysitter, governess, and she goes and spies on the neighbors in a very fancy building, and that's how I got to know in New York, in the skyscrapers, away from where my grandparents were in Queens. Of course, there's J.D. Salinger, there's Truman Capote, there's James Baldwin, Edith Wharton, many, many, many more, Paul Auster and his trilogy. So that I have many images of New York, and I want to know what that does to you as writers. Like, are the ghosts of these books with you when you're writing? Like, do you have to purposely cut them away and read Swiss literature to focus on your writing in New York?
Well, I already gave it away. In my case, it was a Russian writer. I didn't feel threatened by that, because I also didn't feel like I'm in competition with all that. I mean, I think, I don't know, competition when it comes to literature is really quite pointless. You know, I mean, I actually think competition might be quite pointless when it comes to ski racing, you know, because I don't know.
The Olympics
wanna,
now.
Huh?
The Olympics now.
The Olympics now, you know, I don't want to alienate any skiing fans, but I when I look at this, I always think of it, what's the rush, you know? And I think that translates nicely into the literary world, because there the rush is not a good thing.
But then there are these images that, like, you know, that certain person wrote about something in a specific way, and like, wow, I'm not a writer, but still I'm like totally in awe, and there's like this magic moment for certain descriptions that would make me feel intimidated.
I mean, I am in awe too, but I think I am what I would maybe label a sponge writer. And that means I'm not one of those writers who can't read other novels while I'm writing one. I'm constantly reading, I'm constantly writing, and the sponge in me really absorbs all that, and through the process of, I don't know what, osmosis or something, spits it out onto my page, hopefully in an original way. So in a sense, those are all allies to me. I mean, it's really the more the better.
Elisabeth?
I think I would say, when you say ghosts, I didn't think of this in the sense of competition, but more in the sense of, and there's certain paintings, impressionist paintings, that when you're then in Paris, you remember the painting, or you're looking at what you're seeing it through all the paintings, you know. And in a similar way, I would say with New York, both through literature and through film, and I kept trying to have a list of filmmakers, when you're walking through New York, you know, I'm also, when I'm walking the Upper West Side, or when I'm going to Elaine's or to Zabar's, this is the delicatessen store, of course you think of Woody Allen. When you're walking, I walk more up, down East Side, East Village, across Houston. Of course you're thinking of Scorsese, you're thinking of Mean Streets, you're, as I said, already invoked Taxi Driver. It's more, there's a resonance there, I think of, and when as you were talking right now, I was thinking also of one of my favorite poems, Crossing Brooklyn Bridge, Whitman, which continues to be absolutely beautiful to me. And every time I cross across that bridge, I invariably think of some of the sentences in that poem. So it's more that my contemporary experiences of the city are somehow or other now I can't find the word, covered with both the film images I know and the literary texts that I have imagined in those places, making for a very dense experience of a city. And because New York is such a visual city, because it's brought in so much film, so much artwork, visual arts, and because the literature in New York, not always, but the very New York literature, of course, describes the city as you do, making it very scenic. So I think in that sense, yes, there are, you know, if you want to call them ghosts, or the fact that you're looking through the city through a filter, you know, I mean, if
Tell us a few films, like
is where, okay.
Boston.
No, exactly. I mean, really, there's no filter there. I mean, Yeah, I was thinking, what would be some typical things for us to remember, apart from Scorsese, who isn't really the New York filmmaker. But when we were talking, I reminded you of a film like Crossing Delancey Street, which is really about what it meant for Jewish immigrants to go to New York, and you start out in the very, very orthodox, which is where my father would have grown up, a very, very orthodox little world. And then one of those characters wants to cross Delancey up, because it basically means I'm leaving that very small Jewish world and I'm moving into the more American. It's similar to the Italian Americans who are living in Brooklyn and they look at the bridge. I mean, you know all of these movies, and they're dreaming, gonna get an apartment in Manhattan, because that means getting out of that little Italian American or Irish American
the village
into the other. And then I was also thinking about a film by Susan Seidelman called Desperately Seeking Susan, with a very young and lovely, lush Madonna who has since become so thin and frail, which really celebrates the freeness of, I mean, this is, I can't remember the other actress's name. She's a housewife, she's a suburban housewife, and there's a kind of identity shift, and then she ends up in Manhattan, in Soho, with all these crazy artists. And for her, it's just totally liberating to have been able to get out of the subway into, and this is, of course, a New York that no longer exists. This is the below Houston that you were also invoking. So these are other films that I was thinking about. But then, of course, because we haven't really mentioned this yet, I mean, apart from many other things, fashion, and there is going to be a new Devil Wears Prada, which I think everyone should watch, with the wonderful Meryl Streep and Stan Tucci. It's also Wall Street. And Wall Street has always been there, it's always been important, but especially when New York changes in the 80s, because until the early 80s, New York is almost a ghost town. Mm-hmm. And then a film like Wall Street and Gecko saying, greed is great, right? That also, and may I just remind us all that this is the New York that produced Donald Trump.
Yes,
with
this would be one of my next
Trump
questions.
Tower, and remember the golden,
The
the first golden waterfall. Indoors, these shopping.
I went there with my grandma. She loved waterfalls, so we would go for
and
lunch.
It was golden,
to Trump Tower.
And this was not the suburban ones. So this also, I think, is important, that it is a place where money is made and lost and made again, and where greed and capitalism and the ruthlessness that has always been American culture is epitomized in those bulls, those statues in front of the. So this would be another series of films I think of when I'm down there.
And this is I'm very happy that we were able to speak about Trump only in the beginning, and now the question is Trump a product of New York? Would he be Donald Trump, the president of the United States, had he grown up in North Carolina or in Montana or in, I don't know, Boston?
I don't know about that. There would be no Donald Trump without New York City. But whether he become the president, I don't know. But he is very much the product of German immigrants going to New York and making a huge amount of money in a city that is utterly corrupt. It's corrupt when it comes to construction. That's why that subway is never going to be cleaned up. And why, Maaza, you're still always going to see those rats there. They get so much money, but they can't clean it up because of the corruption. And that has very much to do with construction, and that is very much how Trump made his money. And he was able to do that because there were people like Roger Cohen there before. So New York City, at best, produces artists and literature and fashion. And at worst, produces these businessmen, these shady businessmen with their strange deals, who can then, that it's not because of the New York voters, if I might say that. We did not vote for Donald Trump.
We did not. We're very blue.
I want to say, too, I think this is really interesting, because when I think about, I hate saying his name, but when I think about Trump, I also think that he's very much a product of Queens, and I'd love to hear.
Yes, you're right.
The thought, because he was born in Queens, he was always looking at New York as I think a kind of aspiration, and Queens had as much to do with his sense of what he wanted to rebel against, the people he would want to crush, and all of that. And I can't help thinking about that, and I remember when he was first elected in 2016. His house, I checked, my husband is from Queens. His house that was in Jamaica, I think Jamaica Hills, had been up for sale throughout the campaign. Nobody wanted to buy it. And then once he got elected, I was said, oh, I am almost sure this thing is now going to sell. And nobody wanted to buy it. Nobody, and then finally there was some foreign developers that got it, and maybe they're going to make it into a museum or something, I have no idea. But it took this long for that. And so for me it felt like, and I hope he knew that no one ever wanted to buy his house. But I keep thinking of what you were saying about New York, that we didn't vote for him. We didn't want him. Nobody even wanted that house after he became president. And I think that is, in a sense, why he will be after New York. I mean, he's focused on Minneapolis and DC, and he's mentioned New York now. But I think we'll see what happens. But I do think he has a real animosity, even though it is a city that made him.
I want to pick up on that point because some of you may remember the 2016 election when someone I adored, Hillary Clinton, was running against him. And one had a real sense, there was this one event where they roost people. I've forgotten now, it's in a religious place, but I have forgotten what they're called.
Isn't it a correspondence dinner?
No, I don't mean, that was the other one, but there's another one where you really saw, he felt that New York had never accepted him. People found him crass. He was able to make money, but he was never part of because the New York elite exists, and they are horrible, like all urban elites, right? They have the money, they have the class, they give money here, they give there, they have, their endowed names on all the buildings. He was never part of that. And it's very true if one looks back at not just the correspondence dinner, but other events where you realize what he really, really wanted was to be acknowledged by the important people in the city. And that city was from the very beginning against him. All the newspapers, the magazines, the television, we kept saying, stop reporting him. All this is propaganda for him, even if it's an attack on him. But I think that you're very right to say that one of the ways to understand Donald Trump is to see that he belongs to the people who aspire to become something really big in the city that absolutely would not, and of course now will never, allow him to be that what he wants, which is perhaps why there's all that gold. He wants so much to be a king, but it does not work in New York society, and this is where someone like Henry James or Edith Wharton comes into play, and Scorsese making movies about, for example, Edith Wharton's film Age of Innocence. It's also very rigid as a culture. It's free, it's open, and yet there are also many places where you don't come from the right schools, you didn't go to the right prep school, you're not part of that club.
I mean, that's the crazy part also of New York. It's a city of immigration. Many people come, and as I said, also many people leave to LA, to North and South Carolina and wherever, but that's very tough, the Hackordnung, the way New York works, the elite works. Like, without money, you can't get into private schools, you'll never get into Ivy League universities, you will never get into NYU. There's a whole way of dealing and navigating. I mean, maybe if you're an excellent student, you'll be one out of, I don't know how many thousands to be able to enter one of the schools. We want to speak about many things still, but I also want to give the audience the chance to ask questions. And I want to know from you also, how American is New York, actually? I know this is a question for a whole 90-minute panel, but a short answer to that before the audience gets the chance to ask questions.
Can I just answer this one too? I mean, there's another thing you have to understand. It's true that immigrants come to New York and move on. It's also true that people at the end of the war, 50s, moved into the suburbs. But let's also not forget, including Siri Hustvedt, if I can just do a little advertisement for the end of March when we'll be having her in a discussion.
Elisabeth will be moderating.
In that book she goes on and on and on about she really had to get out of Minnesota. I don't blame her. So New York City, like LA, is one of the places where if you can't stand being in Middle America, that's where you want to be. And either you make it or it breaks you, and often people leave. I think that's also true. I used to know people from Zurich who felt they really had to go to New York, and then after a few years they realized they couldn't make it. So it's also a focal point for people, and that's my answer. New York City, all of it, including Staten Island, is just not Middle America. That's what defines it. I mean, neither is Miami. But I think New York City really is the epitome of what Middle America is not. And I think that's the irony. Trump is a New York product, but it was Middle America that elected him. And that's an interesting contradiction.
Christoph, do you want to say something about that?
What was the question?
The question was, how American is New York? How American?
Oh, well, it used to be very not American. I mean, that's what made us accept that place and love that place. And also, it was. I mean, the reason why we left New York and the U.S. was, you know who, the unspeakable one, but also
the Orange Man.
But also the fact that the rest of America, that the U.S. started to invade New York. That and that goes along with all that extreme cleaning up. I mean, I really don't mind safety in the streets and curb cuts that are not broken and that you can roll and walk along in the streets, but the rest of the U.S. started to invade the kind of genuine New York and push it into the ocean and push it back to Europe.
Do you think this magnetizing thing about New York will stay, or will it lose it? Will it brush off? Will it wash off with all the glass and steel?
I think it will come back because New York is such a place of extremes. That I think it's unkillable, and I think the pendulum will swing the other way.
I think also we have to be fair. I keep saying this when let me say what I want to be fair about. When well-to-do Swiss people tell me, I mean, my children don't want to go to America. I'm like, it's not for your children. America is the dream country for people who are trying to get out of Bangladesh.
Well, that I got with each and every visitor in New York. They stayed 5 days, killed themselves by doing 200 million tourist things a day, and then at the end they said, well, I would never want to live here, which is something you really want to hear as a host. And I said, well, you really don't have to. Bye.
So 1 or 2 questions from the audience, because we're really running out of time, but I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. Be New Yorkish, stand up, say something, ask something. In New York, people just get up and speak out. It makes me very shy. That's when my Swissness comes out.
Well, they do that in St. Gallen too,
Okay. But we can also, it's getting really hot.
Yes, maybe we can open the window again.
Maybe you can open the window
and the bottles.
And the bottles, yeah, you drank your wine. And
so I just know, because I really want to emphasize, okay.
One question.
Since you all live or part-time live in the US, and everyone in Europe is asking, when does the movement against Trump is taking over? So maybe you can tell us a little bit from your expertise. Why is it? It's been now a year that he's on power, I think, for the second time, and it was very, very quiet. Europe was looking to the US, and then there were some protests, no kings, but
I wouldn't call it quiet. First of all, we watched a lot of brave people move towards very close to what we would say is illegal in cities like Minneapolis. and very brave, had centers where they were trained, where they were given whistles, where they were taught how to deal with people from ICE. This was true in Portland, this was true in LA. So that's the first thing. Second thing, the Supreme Court has just turned down by saying it was illegal to impose these tariffs. Now, that is a form of resistance, and that's a really important form of resistance. I would say that every day when I read the New York Times, I'm reading about yet another court that is suing Trump.
Yeah, but you remember the first Trump era, there were a million people
Okay,
on
the
the
Pussy
street.
Riots.
With the
Yeah.
pink hats. But like,
So-
this is a
Where
whole
did
new
that go?
dimension. Where did that
That
go?
didn't go anywhere.
You know,
We're talking about-
if I can add something to this, and I do agree that I think New York, not just New York, but the United States or Americans, they are working with there are communities that are standing up to ICE. I mean, exactly the way, you know, there are churches that are coming together and hiding people. There were people that even in the first Trump administration, and the first time he was elected, I remember in Brooklyn, a church that refused to give up a family that was hiding in the church for weeks. And there was a showdown with immigration police. These kinds of things are happening. But, you know, coming back to New York, I have to say that I don't know if I've ever been more proud to be a New Yorker than when Mamdani got inaugurated. And if there is anything that is basically go to hell Trump, it was, I think, that his election and the fact that we might be seeing across the United States, if the midterm elections are allowed to actually happen the way that they should, I'm hoping a reflection in the way people vote to do this. But Trump was really smart. Not Trump, but the people around him this time were much different than the first time that he was elected. If you remember the first time he was elected, how many times did he have a change of staff? How many people was he firing constantly? That is not happening now. It's as if they've learned their lesson.
Yep.
They're doing the playbook of authoritarians and dictatorships. And one of the ways to do it is to make so many different laws so fast that people don't know how to respond because they are completely surprised by the pace of things. All of these executive orders that are being passed down, or that were being passed down in the first 6 months, that left all of us with our heads spinning, I think contributed to that kind of quietness that Europe and the rest of the world heard. But people are starting to get back on their feet now. And I do think we're seeing this in Minneapolis. New York is getting ready. Chicago is getting ready. I have some kind of hope. I hope it's not naive, but I could tell you that a year ago, I did not feel that way at all. And I'm still scared. I'm very nervous to go back, but seeing Minneapolis gives me some hope.
So let's end it on this and applaud you for...
I have a question.
Oh, sorry, one more
I'll be very
question.
quiet.
Last question.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. First of all, thank you so much. So I lived in New York. I had home there until pandemic. So my first home was 2000 by the Washington Square. I was a student. So my question to all of you, I went through 9/11 and 2008. I went through all the crises in New York since 2000. So to each of you, what's the spirit make New York unkillable, unstoppable? I have my answer, but I want to hear
So tell
from
us
all
your
of you.
answer first, and then everyone can give a short answer. What's your
Well,
answer? What makes New York unkillable?
I think it's people. It's this collective energy. It's its creativity, how people can adapt and transform. And I had when I was a student, I arrived in New York. I was taking subway at the Times Square. There was one event. I was this chaos and order. I come here for this title. I remember, so you know the Times Square, the underground, the subway, how chaotic it is, yeah. So that day, the storm, it
was
was like
raining,
totally
yeah.
flooded. And I was so shocked. And you know how many people was 6 p.m.? And the order, immediately there was this order, how people were moving.
Yeah, there's a very Swiss element also to New York. There are very many rules, and whoever has been to New York longer than
And then
2
911
weeks knows about all these regulations
Yeah.
and order in the subway and what way to stand and how
Yeah,
to
yeah,
stand in
exactly.
line and how much distance there is.
So a year later was 911, and the whole New York was like one family. And the day when Trump was elected, I lived next to the Trump Tower at that time, and I remember, if anybody was there, remember the next day. It rained from morning to evening, like the rain was pouring, like sky was crying. So I remember everywhere you go on the street and in the elevator, it's like 911. You talk to each other.
Everyone was talking to each
Everybody
other.
was talk. It's same like 911.
So what makes New York unkillable? One sentence, Elizabeth.
Well,
Christoph,
it's the energy.
The energy.
New York is such an impossible place, you know. I mean, especially Manhattan, where so many. I mean, there's so many buildings, so high, all the skyscrapers, and all the people living there, and everybody with his or her own story that builds up to one unique hell of a battery that charges your life energy with every step.
Either empower you or depress you. Some people,
Of course,
immediately
it-
they run away. Some people they ride with the flow of that.
we lasted 20 years.
Elizabeth.
I think I would say Wall Street, fashion, a lot of money, and it's a harbor. People invariably come into New York.
Maaza.
Absolutely the people, the bodega owners, the cab drivers, those people that worked even if everyone was in lockdown during the pandemic, those people keep New York alive.
So thank you very much, Maaza Mengiste, for joining us from Berlin. Have a safe time when you go back to New York. Thank you, Elisabeth Bronfen, and thank you, Kristof Keller. Yes. 1 minute. Sorry? It's the writers who won't kill New York. Well, you're right. The writers make New York unkillable. So thank you for that, Jan. And thank you for being here tonight. There will be drinks and apéro outside. And the festival program looks really, really great. There will be very many good talks. Tomorrow at 2, for example, with Zora del Buono. Good night, everyone. Thank you.